Chapter 7. Home life of the Musketeers. When the four young men were outside the Louvre, D'Artagnan consulted his friends on what use he might best make of his share of the 40 pistoles. Athos suggested here a good meal at the sign of the Fir Cone, an excellent tavern. Porthos urged him to engage a lackey. Aramis proposed that D'Artagnan provide himself with a suitable mistress. The banquet took place that very day, with the lackey serving them at table, for Athos had ordered the meal and Porthos had furnished the lackey. D'Artagnan's domestic was called Planquette. He hailed from Picardy. Porthos had picked him up by the bridge at the Quai de la Tournelle. Having found him leaning over the parapet and watching the rings that formed as he spat into the water, Porthos vowed that this occupation gave proof of reflective and contemplative disposition. He therefore engaged him without further recommendation. The Musketeer's noble bearing had won Planquette over immediately, and he congratulated himself on serving so elegant a gentleman. But Porthos soon disabused him by explaining that he already had a valet called Mousqueton, that his mode of life, though considerable, would not support 2 servants, and that Planquette must enter D'Artagnan's service. However, when Planquette waited at the dinner given by his master and saw him take out a handful of gold to pay for it, he believed his fortune made, and he gave thanks to heaven for his luck in meeting such a Croesus. He persevered in this illusion even after the feast, for with its remnants he repaired his long abstinence. But when he made his master's bed that evening, his chimeras vanished like so much smoke. D'Artagnan's was the only bed in the apartment, which consisted of an antechamber and a bedroom. Planquette had to sleep in the antechamber on a coverlet which D'Artagnan stripped from the bed and had thenceforth to do without. Athos, for his part, had a valet named Grimaud. The word means ignoramus and, by extension, a scribbler, whom he had trained to serve him in a singularly original manner. He was an extraordinarily taciturn man, this Athos. He had been living in the strictest intimacy with his comrades Porthos and Aramis for 5 or 6 years. During all that time they could remember having often seen him smile, but they had never once heard him laugh. His words were brief and expressive, conveying all that was meant and no more, with never any embellishments, embroideries or arabesques. His conversation dealt with hard facts, with never an episode or interlude of fantasy. Although Athos was barely 30 years old, strikingly handsome and remarkably intelligent, he was never known to have had a mistress. He never spoke of women. To be sure, he never prevented others from doing so in his presence, but this sort of talk, to which he contributed only bitter comment and misanthropic observations, was obviously disagreeable to him. His reserve, his severity and his silence made almost an old man of him. In order not to depart from his habits, he had accustomed Grimaud to obey his slightest gesture or a mere movement of his lips. He spoke to him only under the most exceptional circumstances. Though Grimaud entertained a strong attachment to his master's person and a great veneration for his character, he feared him as he feared fire. Sometimes, believing he understood what Athos desired, he would hasten to execute the order received and do precisely the contrary. Athos would then shrug his shoulders and, without losing his temper, give Grimaud a sound thrashing. On these occasions, Athos would speak a little. Porthos, as we have already seen, was by character quite the opposite of Athos. Porthos not only talked much, but he talked loudly and, to do him justice, without caring whether anybody was listening to him or not. He talked for the pleasure of talking and for the pleasure of hearing himself talk on all subjects except the sciences, explaining this omission by the inveterate hatred he had borne scholars since childhood. Less distinguished in bearing and manner than Athos, he was conscious of his inferiority. In the early days of their intimacy, this had often caused him to be unjust toward his friend, whom he sought to outshine by the brilliance of his sartorial effects. But in his simple musketeer's uniform, with only his way of tossing back his head or of advancing his foot, Athos at once regained the place that was his due, relegating the ostentatious Porthos to a subordinate position. Porthos consoled himself by filling Monsieur de Treville's antechamber and the guard-room at the Louvre with his amatory triumphs, which Athos never mentioned. At the present moment, having passed from the judiciary to the military, from the legislator to the warrior's wife, Porthos was concerned with nothing less than a foreign princess who was enormously fond of him. The old proverb says, "Tell maître, tell valet, like master, like man." Having considered Grimaud, valet to Athos, let us now consider Mousqueton, who served Porthos in like capacity. He was a Norman rejoicing under the pacific name of Boniface, a term applied to artless or witless persons, until Porthos made him change it to the infinitely more sonorous name of Mousqueton. He agreed to serve Porthos on condition he be merely clothed and lodged, but on a handsome scale. In return, he worked elsewhere 2 hours a day at a job which provided for his other wants. Porthos accepted the bargain, for it suited him perfectly. He would have doublots fashioned out of his old clothes and spare cloaks for Mousqueton. Thus, thanks to a very skillful tailor who made the clothes look as good as new by turning them, his wife was suspected of wishing to lure Porthos away from his aristocratic habits. Mousqueton cut a very dashing figure when he waited upon his master. As for Aramis, we believe we have presented his character clearly enough. Besides, we shall be able to follow it and those of his companions in their development. His lackey was named Bazin, and he came from the province of Berry, because his master hoped to take holy orders. The servant was always clad in black, as becomes the domestic of a churchman. He was a man of about 35 or 40, mild, peaceable and chubby. In his spare time, he would read pious words. When required, he could whip up a dinner for the two of them that boasted few dishes but excellently prepared. In conclusion, he was dumb, or blind, deaf, and of unimpeachable loyalty. Now that we are at least superficially familiar with the masters and lackeys, let us summarily observe the quarters they occupied. Athos lived in the Rue Froux, within 2 steps of the Luxembourg. His apartment consisted of 2 small rooms, agreeably furnished, in a lodging-house maintained by a woman, still young and really handsome, who cast warm, tender glances at him in vain. Here and there the walls of his humble abode shone with vestiges of past splendors. There was, for instance, a richly embossed sword which obviously belonged to the age of Francois I. Its hilt, studded with precious stones, was alone worth 200 pistoles. Yet in his moments of direst need, Athos had never sought to pawn or sell it. This sword had long been an object of immense envy to Porthos, who would have given 10 years of his life to possess it. One day, having an appointment with the Duchess, he tried to borrow it. Athos, without saying a word, emptied his pockets, gathered all his jewels, purses, aiglettes and gold chains, and offered the lot to Porthos. As for the sword, he told him, it was sealed to the wall and would not come down until its master moved out of these lodgings. In addition to this sword, there was a portrait of a nobleman of the time of Henry III, dressed with the greatest elegance and wearing the blue ribbon of the Order of the Holy Ghost. Certain features common to the subject of the portrait and Athos indicated that this great lord, a knight of the Order of the King, was his ancestor. Besides these, the casket of magnificent gold work, bearing the same crest as sword and portrait and forming a middle ornament to the mantelpiece, displayed a massive elegance utterly out of keeping with the rest of the furniture. Athos always carried the key to this casket on his person, but one day he chanced to open it in the presence of Porthos, who was convinced that it contained nothing but letters and papers, love letters, doubtless, and family papers. Porthos lived in an apartment of vast dimensions and very sumptuous appearance in the Rue du Vieux Colombier. Whenever he chanced to stroll by with a friend, he would point to his windows, at one of which Mousqueton was certain to be standing. dressed in full livery, and, raising head and hand, exclaimed sententiously, "That is where I live." Yet as he was never to be found at home and never invited anybody in, the true riches of this palatial residence remained a mystery. As for Aramis, his modest abode consisted of a boudoir, a dining room and a bedroom, all on the ground floor, overlooking a tiny garden, green, fresh, shady and safe from the eyes of prying neighbors. D'Artagnan, intellectually curious like most enterprising people, did his best to try to discover the key to the pseudonyms under which Athos, Porthos and Aramis cloaked their identities. He was particularly interested in Athos, whose high nobility could be detected in his merest gesture. But Monsieur de Treville alone possessed this secret. Vainly D'Artagnan sought to pump Porthos for information about Athos and to draw out Aramis on the subject of Porthos. All he could find out about Athos was the following. Porthos knew no more about his taciturn comrade than was self-apparent. Rumor had it that Athos had suffered desperate crosses in love and that a tragic betrayal had poisoned his existence. What this treachery was and who were the principals in this drama, nobody knew. The life of Porthos, except for his real name, was an open book. His vanity and indiscretion made him as transparent as crystal. One factor alone, the excellent opinion Porthos entertained of himself, might conceivably have led an investigator astray. Aramis, while appearing anything but secretive, was a very repository of arcana. He replied meagerly to the questions asked him about others and he eluded those concerning himself. One day D'Artagnan, questioning Aramis at length about Porthos, learned the current rumor about the latter's success with the princess. His curiosity whetted, he sought to find out something of his interlocutor's amours. "And you, my friend, you who are constantly speaking about the baronesses, countesses and princesses of others? I beg your pardon, I speak of them because Porthos himself did. As you have noticed, he is not averse to parading his good fortune. Believe me, my dear D'Artagnan, if I had them from any other source or if they had been given me in confidence, I can think of no confessor more discreet than I am sure of that, my dear Aramis. Yet it seems to me that you are quite familiar with armorial bearings. I seem to remember a certain embroidered handkerchief to which I owe the honor of your acquaintance." This time Aramis, far from being angry, assumed his most modest air and replied in a friendly tone, "Don't forget, my dear friend, that I intend to become a churchman. I therefore eschew all mundane and fashionable pleasures. The handkerchief you saw was not mine. It had been mislaid at my house by a friend. I had perforce to pick it up in order not to compromise him and the lady he loves. As for myself, I have no mistress and do not desire one. In this, I follow the judicious example of Athos, who is as celibate as I. Devil take it, you are not an abbé. You are a musketeer provisionally, ad interim, as the cardinal says, a musketeer in spite of himself. At heart I am a churchman. Believe me, Athos and Porthos dragged me into this role to occupy my mind, because, at the moment I was being ordained, I had a little difficulty with. Oh well, never mind. This must be boring you and I'm wasting your valuable time. Not at all. I am much interested and I have nothing to do for the moment. That may be, but I have my breviary to read. Then I must compose some verses which Madame d'Aiguillon begged of me. Then I must go to the Rue Saint-Honore to buy some rouge for Madame de Chevreuse. So you see, my dear friend, that if you are not in a hurry, I most certainly am." With which he held out his hand most cordially and took his leave of his companion. Since despite repeated efforts, this was all D'Artagnan could learn about his new friends, he determined to believe for the present all that was said of their past and to look to the future for more extensive and authoritative revelations. Meanwhile, the life of the four young men was pleasant enough. Athos gambled and as a rule, unluckily. Yet he never borrowed a sou from his companions though his own purse was ever at their service. and when he played on credit, he invariably awakened his creditor by 6 o'clock next morning to pay his debts. Porthos was erratic. When he won, he was insolent and splendiferous. When he lost, he disappeared completely for several days to reappear subsequently with pallid face and drawn features but money in his purse. As for Aramis, he never placed a wager. He was the unconventional musketeer and the most unconvivial comrade imaginable. Sometimes at dinner when, amid a flush of wine and geniality of conversation, everybody expected to stay on for 2 or 3 hours, Aramis would glance at his watch, rise, and, with a gracious smile, take leave of the company. He was off, he said, to consult some casuist with whom he had an appointment, or he must go home to write a treatise, and therefore begged his friends not to disturb him, at which Athos would smile in that charming, melancholy way that illumined his noble countenance, and Porthos, draining his glass, vowed that Aramis would never be anything but a village priest. Planchet, D'Artagnan's lackey, endured his master's prosperity with noble zeal, and, his daily wage of 30 sous in his pocket, returned to his lodgings blithe as a chaffinch and a model of affability. But when the winds of adversity began to sweep across the dwelling in the Rue des Fossoyeurs, in other words when the 40 pistoles of Louis XIII were more or less gone, he launched into a series of complaints which Athos considered nauseous, Porthos unbecoming, and Aramis ridiculous. Athos advised him to dismiss the fellow. Porthos agreed but insisted that Planchet be roundly thrashed before being dismissed. Aramis contended that a good master should heed only the compliments paid him. Easy enough to say, D'Artagnan objected. You, Athos, live with Grimaud. You forbid him to talk. Your life is a complete silence, and so you never have words with him. You, Porthos, live like Magnifico and therefore are a god to your valet Mousqueton. And you, Aramis, forever intent upon your theological studies, inspire your valet Bazin, a mild religious sort of man, with the most profound respect. But what about me? I have no settled means and no resources. I am neither a musketeer nor even a guardsman. How on earth can I inspire Planchet with affection, terror or respect? His 3 friends acknowledged that the matter was serious. It was, they added, a family affair. Valets were like wives. They must be placed at outset upon the footing they were subsequently to remain. They advised D'Artagnan to think it all over with great care. D'Artagnan did exactly that. First, he gave Planchet a cautionary but healthy drubbing. Then, Planchet drubbed. He forbade him ever to leave his service, and, for good measure, he told him, "The future cannot fail to prosper me. I am but waiting for the better times that must inevitably come. If you stay with me, your fortune is made. I am much too good a master to allow you to forfeit it by granting you the dismissal you request." D'Artagnan's firmness won the approval of his 3 friends, and, equally important, that of Planchet, who said no more about quitting his service, and so their comradely, happy-go-lucky life went on. D'Artagnan, fresh from his province in a world that was bafflingly novel, fell in easily with their habits. In winter they would rise at 8 o'clock, in summer at 6, and report immediately at Monsieur de Treville's to receive orders and to see how the land lay. Though not a musketeer, D'Artagnan performed this duty with touching punctuality. He mounted guard whenever one or another of his friends was on duty. People at the Hotel de Treville knew him and considered him a good comrade. Monsieur de Treville, who had liked him from the first and who bore him a real affection, never ceased to commend him to the king. The 3 musketeers thought the world of him. They would all meet, 3 or 4 times daily, whether for dueling, business or pleasure. Each was the other's shadow, and from the Luxembourg to the Place Saint-Sulpice or from the Rue du Vieux Colombier to the Luxembourg they were soon known as the Inseparables. Meanwhile Monsieur de Treville was working on D'Artagnan's behalf as keenly as he had promised. One fine morning the king ordered Monsieur le Chevalier des Arts to admit D'Artagnan as a cadet in his company of guards. As he donned the guardsman's uniform, D'Artagnan sighed, for he would have given 10 years of his life to exchange it for that of a musketeer. But Monsieur de Treville assured him he could do so only after his trial period of 2 years in another regiment, unless, in the meantime, he found an opportunity to render His Majesty some signal service or to distinguish himself by some brilliant action. D'Artagnan a guardsman, what could Athos, Porthos and Aramis do but reciprocally mount guard with him when he was on duty? Thus Monsieur le Chevalier des Arts Company, by admitting one D'Artagnan, found itself 4 men the stronger. Chapter 8. Concerning a court intrigue. Like all good things in this world, the 40 pistoles of Louis XIII, having had a beginning, came to their appointed end, which placed the 4 comrades in an awkward situation. At first, Athos supported the group for a while out of his own pocket. Next Porthos succeeded him, and, thanks to one of his customary disappearances, kept them going a fortnight. Next Aramis came to the rescue with good grace and a few pistoles he had obtained, so he said, by selling some theological books. Next, as they had done so often, they appealed to Monsieur de Treville, who advanced them some money on their pay. But these advances did not go very far with 3 musketeers who were heavily in arrears and a guardsman who as yet had had no pay at all. Finally, realizing they were about to fall into dire want, they managed by a last desperate effort to raise 8 or 10 pistoles with which Porthos was dispatched to the gaming table. Unfortunately he was not in luck. He lost every sou plus 25 pistoles for which he pledged his word. Then their want became actual distress as the 4 hungry friends, followed by their 4 hungry lackeys, wanted the keys and guardrooms of the city to prove that Aramis was right in saying, "It is wise to sow meals right and left in prosperity in order to reap a few in time of need." Athos was invited 4 times and each time brought his friends and their lackeys along. Porthos was invited 6 times, which provided them all with 6 more meals. Aramis was invited 8 times. As we have seen, he was a very quiet man but much sought after, and 8 times his friends shared his good fortune. D'Artagnan, who as yet knew no one in the capital, unearthed a priest from his own province who supplied a light breakfast with chocolate, and a cornet of the guards who furnished a dinner at his home. The Gascon took his troop to the priest's, where they devoured a stock of food that would have lasted the cleric 2 months, and to the home of the cornet, who did wonders. But as Planquet remarked, people do not eat once for all time even when they eat a great deal. D'Artagnan felt humiliated at having procured only 1 meal and a half for his companions. Breakfast at the priest's could only be counted as a half meal, in return for the banquets Athos, Porthos and Aramis had procured him. He fancied himself a burden to the group, forgetting in his wholly youthful good faith that he had entertained them for a whole month. His plight gave him considerable food for thought. He came to the conclusion that this coalition of 4 young, brave, enterprising and active men ought to have some other object than swaggering about the city, taking fencing lessons and playing practical jokes that were more or less witty. In fact, 4 men devoted to one another whether their purses or lives were involved. 4 men always supporting one another, never yielding, and executing singly or together the resolutions they had made in common. 4 arms threatening the 4 cardinal points are concentrated upon a single point. In brief, 4 such men as they, must inevitably, by open or underground means, by mine work or in a trench, by cunning or by force, open up a way toward their goal, however fiercely defended or distant it might seem. The only thing that surprised D'Artagnan was that his friends had not thought of this. He for his part, was thinking seriously of it, racking his brain to find a direction for this single force 4 times multiplied, and the longer he meditated, the surer he became that, as with the lever Archimedes sought, Athos, Porthos, Aramis and D'Artagnan would succeed in moving the world. Suddenly there was a light knock at the door. D'Artagnan awakened Planchet and ordered him to open it. The phrase D'Artagnan awakened Planchet must not lead the reader to believe that it was night or that day had not yet broken. No, it was afternoon. It had just struck 4. 2 hours before, Planchet had asked his master for some dinner, to which D'Artagnan replied by quoting the proverb qui dort, dine, he who sleeps, dines, and Planchet dined by sleeping. A stranger entered, a man of unassuming appearance, obviously a simple bourgeois. Planchet would have relished, by way of dessert, to overhear the conversation, but the man told D'Artagnan that what he had to say was both important and confidential, and solicited a private interview. D'Artagnan therefore dismissed his valet and requested his visitor to be seated. During the short silence that ensued, the two men looked at each other appraisingly. Then D'Artagnan bowed, to signify that he was ready to listen. The stranger began. I have heard Monsieur spoken of as a very courageous young man. This well-deserved reputation emboldens me to confide a secret to him. Speak, Monsieur, speak. D'Artagnan replied, instinctively sensing that the matter might prove profitable. The stranger paused again, then went on. I have a wife who is seamstress to Her Majesty the Queen. My wife is not lacking in either virtue or beauty, though she brought but a small dowry. I was induced to marry her about 3 years ago because Monsieur de Laporte, the Queen's cloak-bearer, is her godfather and befriends her. Well, Monsieur? Well, Monsieur, the stranger repeated. Well, Monsieur, my wife was abducted yesterday morning as she was leaving her workroom. By whom was your wife abducted? I know nothing for certain, Monsieur, but I have my suspicions. And whom do you suspect? A man who has been pursuing her for a long time. The devil, you say? Let me add this, Monsieur. I am convinced that there is more politics than love in this business. More politics than love? D'Artagnan murmured with a thoughtful air. And what do you suspect? I hardly know whether I should tell you what I suspect. I beg you to observe, Monsieur, that I am asking absolutely nothing of you. It was you who came to me to tell me that you had a secret to confide in me. Do just as you please. It is not too late to withdraw. No, Monsieur, you seem to be an honest young man and I have confidence in you. Frankly, I do not believe my wife has been arrested because of any love affair of her own, but rather because of the conduct of a lady far mightier than herself. Aha, I see. D'Artagnan commented knowingly and, pretending to be familiar with court affairs, he added, can it be on account of the amours of Madame de Bois Tracy? Higher, Monsieur, higher, of Madame d'Aiguillon? Higher still, Monsieur, of Madame de Chevreuse? Higher, much higher, of the... D'Artagnan checked himself. Yes, Monsieur. His terrified visitor replied so low as to be almost inaudible. And with whom? With whom else could it be save with the Duke of? The Duke of? D'Artagnan repeated, hiding his ignorance and bewilderment. Yes, Monsieur, the stranger interrupted, even more faintly than before. But how do you know all this? How do I know it, exactly? How do you know it? No half-confidences now. Or, you understand, I know it through my wife, Monsieur. I heard it from her own lips. And your wife? Where did she learn this? From Monsieur de Laporte. Didn't I tell you my wife is his goddaughter, and isn't he Her Majesty's most confidential retainer? Well, Monsieur de Laporte placed my wife near Her Majesty in order that our poor queen might at least have someone she could trust. Abandoned as she is by the king, spied upon by the cardinal, and betrayed by everybody. Ah, your story is taking shape. Now, My wife came home 4 days ago, monsieur. I must explain that one of the conditions she made on accepting the position was that she should visit me twice a week, for, as I had the honor to tell you a moment ago, she loves me dearly. Well, she came home and she told me that at that very moment Her Majesty was frightened. Indeed, His Eminence, it would seem, pursues and persecutes her more than ever. He cannot forgive her the incident of the saraband. You know the story of the saraband, monsieur? Of course I know it, D'Artagnan answered, though he had never even heard of it. He must appear to know everything that was going on. So the cardinal's feelings are stronger than hatred now. He is moved by the lust of vengeance. Is that so? And the Queen believes. Well, what does Her Majesty believe? She believes that someone has written to the Duke of Buckingham in her name. In the Queen's name, in order to persuade him to come to Paris and, once here, to draw him into some trap. Devil take it, what a tale. But what has your wife to do with all this, monsieur? Her devotion to the Queen is well known. Somebody therefore wishes either to remove her from her mistress or, by intimidating her, to learn Her Majesty's secrets, or to win her over and use her as a spy. That seems plausible. D'Artagnan agreed. But what about the man who abducted her? Do you know him? As I said, I think I know him. His name? That, I do not know. But I do know he is a creature of the cardinal's, the tool of His Eminence's will. You have seen him, My wife pointed him out to me one day. Is there anything particularly noticeable about him? Any distinctive feature? Certainly. He is a nobleman of lofty bearing. Black hair. A swarthy complexion. Eyes piercing as drills. Very white teeth. And a scar on his temple. A scar on his temple. D'Artagnan murmured, very white teeth. Eyes piercing as drills. A swarthy complexion. Black hair. A lofty bearing. Why? That's my man of Mung. Your man, you say? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it. No, I am wrong. On the contrary, that simplifies matters considerably. If your man is mine, I shall avenge 2 wrongs at one blow. That's all. But where can I find this man? I'm sure I don't know. Would you happen to know where he lives? One day I was accompanying my wife back to the Louvre and he came out as she went in. That was when she pointed him out to me. Devil take it. Blast and confound it. All this is very vague. D'Artagnan cursed. Then, look here. How did you hear your wife had been abducted? Monsieur de Laporte told me. Did he give you any details? He knew none himself. Did you obtain any other information? Monsieur, I received. What? I am afraid I'm committing a serious indiscretion. There you are, back on the same tack. This time I must point out that you have gone too far to retreat now. Mordieu, I'm not retreating, the other swore, hoping the blasphemy might bolster his courage. Besides, as sure as I am Benisucks. So your name is Benisucks, you were saying, as sure as I am Benisucks. Forgive me for interrupting, but I think your name is not unfamiliar. Possibly, monsieur. I am your landlord. Ah, you are my landlord, said D'Artagnan, half rising and bowing to his visitor. Said the visitor pertinently, you have been here 3 months, have you not, monsieur? Of course I realize how with your important occupations, you have forgotten to pay me my rent. But since I have not bothered you about this, I thought you would appreciate my tact. Believe me, my dear Monsieur Benisucks, I am truly grateful to you for your consideration. As I told you, if I can be of any service to you, I take you at your word, monsieur, and, as I was about to tell you, as sure as I am Benisucks, I believe in you implicitly. Go ahead, then. Go on with what you were about to say. Benisucks took a sheet of paper from his pocket and presented it to D'Artagnan. A letter? Monsieur, I received it this morning. It was dusk. The room was swathed in shadows. D'Artagnan moved toward the window to read it, Benisuc at his heels. Unfolding the paper, D'Artagnan read, "Do not look for your wife. She will be sent back to you when her services will have ceased to be of use. Do you but take one step to attempt to find her, you are irremediably lost. That is positive enough," D'Artagnan remarked, "but after all it is merely a threat." "But a threat that terrifies me, monsieur. I am no soldier or duelist, and I dread the Bastille. I am no keener on the Bastille than you are, were it but a question of dueling. Ah, monsieur, you cannot imagine how much I have been counting on you in this connection. Really, I have seen you constantly surrounded by musketeers, men of the proudest and most resolute bearing. I recognize them immediately as belonging to Monsieur de Treville and therefore enemies of the cardinal. Naturally, I suppose that you and your friends would be delighted at once to do the Queen justice and the cardinal an ill turn. Undoubtedly. I also bethought me that in view of the 3 months' rental about which I have said nothing." Yes, you have already used that argument. I find it excellent. I also thought that so long as you remain under my roof, if I were never to mention the rent again. Very good. What else? Well, to go further, I thought I would make bold to offer you, say, about 50 pistoles. If it proved necessary. I mean if you should happen to be short of cash at the moment, which I am certain is not the case. Admirable. So you are a rich man, my dear Monsieur Benisuc. I am comfortably off, monsieur. That's all. I have scraped together an income of something like 200,000 or 300,000 crowns. First in the haberdashery business, I started in small wares, but particularly in an investment I made. I ventured some funds in the most recent voyage of Jean Mackay, the celebrated navigator. You can judge for yourself. Then, monsieur, but look. What, over there? Where? In the street, facing your house, on the doorsill opposite, a man wrapped in a cloak. Suddenly both recognized their man. "It's the man I told you about," said Benisuc. "It's the man I'm after," cried D'Artagnan, springing across the room for his sword. "This time he will not escape me." Drawing his sword from its scabbard, he rushed out of the apartment. On the staircase he met Athos and Porthos. They separated as D'Artagnan sped between them like a dart. "What's up? Where are you off to?" "What's the matter?" "The man of Meung," D'Artagnan cried as he disappeared. He had more than once told his friends about his adventure with the sinister stranger and the apparition of the beautiful English traveler to whom his enemy had confided some important missive. The musketeers had long since formed their own opinions about the incident. According to Athos, D'Artagnan must have lost his letter in the skirmish. From D'Artagnan's description, the stranger must have been a gentleman. No gentleman could possibly debase himself to pilfer a letter. According to Porthos, the imbroglio was due to love. A lady had given her cavalier a rendezvous or vice versa, and D'Artagnan, yellow nag and all, had interrupted them. According to Aramis, affairs of this kind were buried in mysteries it was better not to fathom. Athos and Porthos understood, from D'Artagnan's cry, what the young Gascon was about. He would either meet his man of Meung and dispatch him promptly, or he would lose sight of him. In either case, he would return home. Accordingly, they continued to walk upstairs. When they entered D'Artagnan's room, it was empty. Benisuc, fearing the consequences that must inevitably attend the encounter between D'Artagnan and his archenemy, had judged it prudent to decamp, which was quite in keeping with the description he himself had given of his character. Chapter 9. D'Artagnan to the fore. As Athos and Porthos had foreseen, D'Artagnan returned within a half-hour. Once again he had missed his man. Sword in hand, D'Artagnan had run up and down all the neighboring streets to no avail. He found nobody who looked like the prey he had hoped to stalk. The man of Meung had vanished, as by magic, into thin air. Baffled, he presently decided to do what he should perhaps have done in the first place, namely knock at the door against which his enemy had been leaning, but this proved useless. Though he slammed down the knocker 10 or 12 times, no one answered. Presently some of the neighbors, alerted by the noise he was making, appeared on their doorsteps or poked their heads out of the window, and D'Artagnan was variously assured that the house had been uninhabited for 6 months. He himself could see that doors and windows were tightly locked, while D'Artagnan was running through the streets and knocking at doors. Aramis had joined his companions. When D'Artagnan returned home he found his friends waiting in full force. "Well?" asked Athos with pessimistic calm as D'Artagnan burst in, his brow bathed in perspiration, his face black with anger. "Well?" said Porthos jauntily. "Well?" said Aramis in a tone of discreet encouragement. "Well?" D'Artagnan threw his sword on the bed. "Well? That man must be the devil in person. He vanished like a phantom, a shadow, a spectre." "Do you believe in apparitions, Porthos?" Athos inquired. "I believe only in what I have seen. I have never seen an apparition. Therefore I do not believe in apparitions. The Bible orders us by law to believe in them." Aramis remarked, "Did not the ghost of Samuel appear to Saul? Belief in apparitions constitutes an article of faith. I would deplore it if any doubts were cast on this matter, Porthos. At all events, man or devil, body or shadow, illusion or reality, that man was born for my damnation," said D'Artagnan. "His flight, gentlemen, has caused us to lose a wonderful piece of business by which we might have gained 100 pistoles if not more." "How so?" Porthos asked. "What?" Aramis exclaimed. Athos, true to his philosophy of reticence, merely cast D'Artagnan a questioning glance. Just then Planchet craned his neck through the doorway to try to catch some fragments of the conversation. "Planchet," D'Artagnan ordered, "go down to my landlord, Monsieur Benissux, and tell him to send up 6 bottles of Beaugency wine. It is my favorite tipple." "So you have credit with your landlord, eh?" "Yes, I established credit today. If his wine is bad, never mind. We will send him to find something more palatable. We must use and not abuse," said Aramis sententiously. "I have always maintained that D'Artagnan was the most brainy of the 4 of us," said Athos. D'Artagnan bowed at the compliment and Athos relapsed into his wonted silence. "Look here, why don't you explain all this to us?" Porthos suggested. "Yes, tell us everything, my dear friend." Aramis agreed, "unless the honor of some lady is involved, in which case you would do better to keep your story to yourself. You may set your mind at rest, Aramis. My story will not harm anybody's reputation." Then word for word he related all that had passed between his landlord and himself, concluding with the startling information that Madame Benisux's abductor and D'Artagnan's enemy at the sign of the Jolly Miller in Moon were one and the same man. Having sampled the wine like a connoisseur and nodded to indicate that he found it good, Athos declared, "You are in luck, D'Artagnan. Your worthy landlord seems good for 50 or 60 pistoles. The only question to debate is whether these 50 or 60 pistoles are worth the risk of 4 heads." "You forget there is a woman in the case," D'Artagnan protested. "A woman who was carried off, a woman who is probably being threatened, and perhaps even being tortured. And all because she is faithful to her mistress." "Careful, D'Artagnan. Go easy, in my opinion. You are overzealous about Madame Benisux's fate," Aramis cautioned. "Woman was created for our destruction. It is from woman that we inherit all our afflictions." As Aramis uttered this maxim, Athos frowned and bit his lips. "I'm not worried about Madame Benisux," D'Artagnan answered, "but about the queen. The king neglects her. The cardinal persecutes her. And her friends are being killed one after the other. Why does she love what we hate most in the world, the Spaniards and the English. Spain is her native land. D'Artagnan explained. It is quite natural that she should love the Spaniards. Are they not children of the same soil as herself? As for your second reproach, I have heard say that she does not love the English, but rather one Englishman. Upon my faith, said Athos, that Englishman deserves to be loved. I never saw a man of nobler aspect in all my life, and he dresses better than anyone in the world. Porthos added, I was at the Louvre the day he scattered his pearls. I picked up 2 that I sold for 10 pistoles apiece. Do you know him? Aramis? Quite as well as you do, gentlemen. I was with those who arrested him in the gardens at Amiens. Monsieur de Putange, the Queen's equerry, had let me in. I was at the seminary at the time. The whole adventure seemed to me to be a cruel blow for the king. If I knew where the Duke of Buckingham was, said D'Artagnan, nothing could prevent me from taking him by the hand and leading him to the Queen's side, if only to enrage the cardinal. After all, gentlemen, our true, sole and eternal enemy is his eminence. If we could find some way to play him a cruel trick, I confess I would gladly risk my head. Please set me right about what your haberdasher landlord told you, said Athos slowly. Did he say the Queen believed that Buckingham came to Paris on the strength of a forged letter? That is what the Queen fears. Wait a minute, Aramis commanded. What for? Asked Porthos. Go on talking. I shall try to recall the exact circumstances. Aramis answered, falling into a brown study. I am convinced, D'Artagnan said, that the abduction of the Queen's seamstress is connected with what we have been discussing and perhaps even with the presence of Buckingham in Paris. That Gascon is full of ideas, Porthos said admiringly. I like to hear him speak, said Athos. His patois delights me. Gentlemen, please listen to what I am about to tell you. Aramis broke in. Go ahead, we are listening. We are all ears. Yesterday, said Aramis, I happened to be at the house of a learned doctor of theology whom I sometimes consult about my studies. Athos smiled. He lives in a quiet, unfrequented quarter. His tastes and profession require it. Aramis continued. Now, just as I was leaving his house, Aramis paused. Well, just as you were leaving his house? Aramis appeared to be making a great effort to master himself. He was like a man who, having launched full sail into a lie, suddenly runs afoul of some unforeseen obstacle. But his 3 friends were staring at him. Their ears were wide open, and he had no means of retreat. This doctor has a niece, Aramis went on. Ah, he has a niece, said Porthos meaningfully. A very respectable lady, Aramis insisted, as the others burst into peals of laughter. If you laugh or if you doubt my words, Aramis warned, you shall hear nothing further. We believe like Mohammedans and we are mute as tombstones, said Athos. Very well then, I shall go on. This niece I mentioned often calls on her uncle. She happened to come yesterday while I was there and I had to offer to see her into her carriage. So your theologian's niece sports a carriage, eh? Porthos interrupted, talkative as usual. Congratulations on your distinguished acquaintances. I have had occasion to observe to you more than once, Porthos, that you are most indiscreet. Aramis answered. That sort of thing does you much harm in the eyes of the ladies. Gentlemen, cried D'Artagnan, who began to glimpse what the outcome of the story might be. This matter is serious. Let us not jest. Go ahead, Aramis. Carry on. All right, D'Artagnan. Suddenly I saw a gentleman, a tall dark man very much like your man of Meung. Perhaps it was my man. It may well have been. Aramis agreed. Anyhow, he advanced towards me, followed at an interval of 10 paces by 5 or 6 men. Monsieur, he said courteously to me, and madame, to the lady on my arm, the doctor's niece. Porthos, hold your tongue, you're unbearable. Apostrophe. Monsieur, madame, Will you be good enough to step into this carriage without offering the slightest resistance or making the least noise? Apostrophe. He took you for Buckingham. D'Artagnan exploded. I rather believe so. But the lady? Porthos persisted. He took her for the queen. D'Artagnan said. Exactly. Aramis assented. That Gascon is the devil, cried Athos. Nothing escapes him, as a matter of fact, Porthos opined. Aramis is about as tall as the dashing duke and has something of the same build. Still, I should imagine the uniform of a musketeer. I wore an enormous cloak. In July, Porthos gasped. Devil take it, is your doctor of theology afraid somebody might recognize you? I can understand how the spy might have mistaken your person, Aramis, but your face. I wore a large, wide-brimmed hat. Evans, Porthos laughed. What elaborate precautions you take to go to study theology. Gentlemen, D'Artagnan urged. Let us waste no more time in jesting. Let us rather separate and look for the haberdasher's wife. She holds the key to the riddle. Do you really think so, D'Artagnan? Porthos curled his lip contemptuously. A woman of such humble standing. She is the goddaughter of Laporte, confidential valet to the Queen. Didn't I tell you that? Besides, on this occasion Her Majesty may deliberately have sought the support of a person of modest station. The heads of those high in rank are very conspicuous and the cardinal's eyesight is of the best. The first thing to do, Porthos counseled, is to drive a bargain, and a good one, with your haberdasher. That's useless. D'Artagnan replied, I have an idea that if Benisux fails to pay us, we shall be paid handsomely by another party. Suddenly footsteps resounded on the stairs. The door flew open and the luckless haberdasher rushed in. Save me, gentlemen, for the love of heaven, save me, he wailed. There are 4 men downstairs who came to arrest me. Save me, save me. Porthos and Aramis sprang to their feet. D'Artagnan intervened hastily. Not so fast, gentlemen. He motioned to them to sheathe their half-drawn swords. It is not courage we need now, but prudence. Are we to stand here? Porthos stormed. And you will allow D'Artagnan to do as he thinks best. Athos declared. He is, as I said before, the brainiest one of our lot. For my part, I am prepared to obey him. Do whatever you wish, D'Artagnan. At that moment, the 4 bailiffs appeared at the door of the antechamber, but seeing 4 musketeers standing there, fully armed, they seemed somewhat hesitant about entering. Come in, gentlemen, come in. D'Artagnan called to them. This is my apartment and we are all faithful servants of the king and of the cardinal, so you have no objection to our carrying out our orders. Gentlemen, on the contrary, we would assist you if that were necessary. What on earth is D'Artagnan saying? Porthos muttered. You're a simpleton. Porthos whispered. Silence. The wretched haberdasher protested in a whisper. But you promise me. We can save you only by remaining free ourselves. D'Artagnan whispered. If we appeared eager to defend you, we would be arrested too. All the same, it seems to me. Come, gentlemen, come, said D'Artagnan, aloud. I have no reason to defend Monsieur here. I saw him today for the first time in my life. He can tell you in what circumstances we met. He came to collect the rent for my lodgings. Is this true or no, Monsieur Benisux? Answer. That is quite true, the landlords answered. But Monsieur has not told you. Not a word about me? Not a word about my friends, and above all, not a word about the Queen, or you will ruin everybody without saving yourself. D'Artagnan cautioned Benisux, then aloud to the bailiffs, Come, gentlemen, take this fellow away, with which he pushed the stunned haberdasher into the arms of the bailiffs. You're a fine rascal, my man, he told Benisux. Imagine coming to dun me for money. Me, a musketeer. Away with him, take him to prison. Gentlemen, once again I beg you, Take him into custody and keep him behind bars as long as ever you can. That will give me time to pay him." The myrmidons of the law, mouthing their thanks, took away their prey. But just as they were about to go downstairs, Dardanian clapped their leader on the shoulder. "Come, I must drink to your health and you to mine," he said jovially, filling 2 glasses with a buoyancy he owed to Monsieur Benisux's liberality. "You do me too much honor," said the leader of the posse. "I accept, and thanks for your kindness, I'm sure." "Well then, here's to you, Monsieur." "Monsieur, what is your name?" "Boyce Renard." "Your health." "Then, Monsieur Boyce Renard, to yours, honored gentleman." "And what is your name, if I may make so bold?" "Dardanian." "Here's to your health, Monsieur. But first and foremost, above all healths," cried Dardanian, as if carried away by his enthusiasm, "I drink to the king and the cardinal." Had the wine been bad, the bailiff might have questioned Dardanian's sincerity, but the wine was good, and he was convinced. "What devilish villainy have you been up to?" Porthos inquired after the bailiff had joined his companions. "Shame on us, shame. Our musketeers have just stood by without moving a finger and allowed an unfortunate fellow who called for help to be arrested under their very noses, and the gentleman responsible for all this has to hobnob with the bailiff. For shame." "Look here, Porthos," Aramis said. "Athos has already told you that you are a simpleton." "May I add that I completely share his opinion?" "Is for you, Dardanian. You are a great man. When you step into Monsieur de Treville's shoes, as undoubtedly you will, I shall ask you to use your influence to secure me an abbey." "Well, I am in amaze," Porthos exclaimed. "Do you mean to say you approve of what Dardanian did?" "Why, of course I do," Athos told him. "I not only approve of it but I offer him my heartiest congratulations." "And now, gentlemen," said Dardanian without troubling to explain his conduct to Porthos, "all for one and one for all, that is our motto, is it not? But still, look here, Porthos demurred. "Hold up your hand and swear," Athos commanded. "Swear, man," Aramis insisted, overcome by the example of his comrades yet grumbling nevertheless. Porthos raised his hand and, with one voice, the 4 friends repeated the slogan dictated by Dardanian. "All for one and one for all." "Excellent," Dardanian approved, and as though he had done nothing all his life save issue orders. "Let us each go his own way now. And remember, from this moment on, we are at war with His Eminence the Cardinal."